Maria stood at the edge of the dirt road, clutching her small suitcase as her mother whispered her final instructions. "Be respectful, listen to your uncle, and always do as he says," her mother said, her voice trembling. A sleek black car pulled into their small compound. Maria's uncle, Mr. Benson, stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the ground. "Ready for the big city?" he asked with a smile. Maria nodded, excitement bubbling in her chest. As they drove away, her mother waved with tears in her eyes, and Maria promised herself she would make her proud. City of dreams, Maria's eyes widened as the towering buildings and glowing billboards of Lagos came into view. The city buzzed with life, cars honking, street vendors shouting, and people rushing in every direction. She felt a mix of awe and nervousness. Mr. Benson glanced at her and chuckled. "You'll get used to it," he said. They pulled into the driveway of a massive mansion. Maria stared, her mouth agape. "This is your new home," her uncle said warmly. For a moment, all her worries melted away as she imagined the opportunities the city might bring. First impressions. The house was filled with luxuries Maria had never imagined. Soft carpets, a massive television, and rooms that seemed endless. Mr. Benson introduced her to his children, David and Clara. They were friendly and quickly included her in their games. "You'll start school soon," Mr. Benson said during dinner. Maria felt a glimmer of hope for a bright future. That night, as she lay in the softest bed she'd ever slept in, she whispered to herself, "This is the start of something good." A growing unease, Maria's days were busy helping around the house and playing with her cousins, but soon she began noticing strange things. Mr. Benson's lingering looks made her uncomfortable, and his compliments felt too personal. She brushed it off, thinking she was overreacting. One evening, as she served him tea, his hand lingered on hers for a moment too long. Maria's heart raced, but she said nothing, unsure of what to do. The first incident one quiet afternoon, Mr. Benson called Maria into his study. "Close the door," he said, his voice calm but firm. Maria obeyed, her stomach twisting in knots. He began asking her strange questions about her life and feelings. Then he reached out and touched her shoulder. "You're a beautiful young girl," he said softly. Maria froze, unsure how to respond. She pulled away and made an excuse to leave. That night she couldn't sleep, her mind replaying the moment over and over. Silent tears, Maria tried to avoid being alone with Mr. Benson, but it was impossible. He found ways to corner her, each time pushing boundaries. She felt trapped and scared. One evening, while cleaning the living room, she overheard him arguing with his wife over the phone. "You're never here," he shouted. Maria realized how lonely he was, but it didn't excuse his behavior. She cried herself to sleep, feeling helpless and alone. A flicker of hope, Maria found solace in David and Clara's company. Playing with them gave her brief moments of happiness. One day, while they were drawing, David noticed her sadness. "Are you okay, Maria?" he asked. She forced a smile and nodded, but his concern touched her heart. For the first time, she considered telling someone what was happening, but fear held her back. The turning point one evening, Mr. Benson's behavior escalated. Maria tried to resist, but he ignored her pleas. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. "Darling, it's me," a voice called. It was his wife, back from her trip. Mr. Benson's face turned pale as he quickly unlocked the door. Maria felt a wave of relief, but knew the problem wasn't over. An unexpected ally, Mrs. Benson's return, brought a temporary reprieve. Maria observed her carefully, trying to decide if she could be trusted. One day, while they were alone, Mrs. Benson asked, "Are you happy here, Maria?" The question caught her off guard. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away and nodded. Mrs. Benson looked at her thoughtfully, but didn't press further. The confession late one night, Maria couldn't hold it in any longer. She told Clara everything, her voice shaking with fear. Clara was shocked, but promised to help. "We have to tell Mom," she said. Maria panicked at the thought, but knew it was the right thing to do. Together, they planned to speak to Mrs. Benson the next day, a mother's fury. When Maria and Clara told Mrs. Benson, her reaction was explosive. "How dare he?" she shouted, her face red with anger. She hugged Maria tightly and promised to protect her. "You're like a daughter to me," she said. Maria finally felt a glimmer of safety. Confrontation. Mrs. Benson confronted her husband in front of Maria and the children. "How could you do this?" she yelled. Mr. Benson tried to deny it, but Maria's tearful testimony left no room for doubt. Mrs. Benson demanded he leave the house immediately. "You don't deserve this family," she said. A new chapter. With Mr. Benson gone, the house felt lighter. Maria began to heal with the support of Mrs. Benson and the children. She started school and found joy in learning. Her nightmares slowly faded, replaced by dreams of a brighter future. Strength in unity. Maria became close to Mrs. Benson, who treated her like her own child. "You're strong, Maria," she often said. Maria began to believe it. She also grew closer to David and Clara, who became her pillars of support. Together they formed a bond that couldn't be broken. A message of hope. Years later, Maria stood in front of a classroom, teaching young girls about their rights and the importance of speaking up. Her journey had been painful, but it had made her stronger. "Never be silent," she told her students. "Your voice is your power." Maria's story became an inspiration, proving that even in the darkest times, hope and courage could lead to a brighter tomorrow.